Hello, everybody. It's Norm Chan from Sentinel-1. I am the pre-sales SE for Sentinel-1 in Western Canada, and I am based out of Vancouver. Thank you, everybody, for joining my session today. I'm going to be talking about the Mitre attack results for 2021. I'm going to try to make this a no-spin zone and reduce the marketing fluff. I want to talk about what the results look like, how to interpret them, because one thing that Mitre does not do when they announce their results for their attack evaluations is they don't declare a winner, and they merely provide the testing this year against 30 different EDR solutions, and they publish the results for everybody to see. They don't really analyze the data. So very often what we see is everybody's marketing departments going into a heavy spin mode, and you see that declarations of being the absolute best, or being the winner, or having amazing levels of maximum detection and protection, things like that. So I'm going to try to stay away from that today, and we're going to try to use the actual data that's on the Mitre website. So let's take a look at the agenda. So we're going to talk about what is Mitre attack and why it matters. We're just going to level set for everybody that's in the audience today. We're going to talk about the testing overview, what Mitre does and how they do the testing. And then we're going to just jump straight to Mitre's website, and we're going to look at the results. We're going to do a live Q&A, and who knows, time permitting, maybe we'll do a little bit of audience participation and pick out some vendors that you're interested in looking at the results together. So who is Mitre Corporation, and specifically what is Mitre Att&Ck? So Mitre Ingenuity is a subset of, it's an independent foundation that was spun off from Mitre Corporation, and they've been charged with forging strong relationships with public and private entities for the betterment of a number of key areas in security. In cybersecurity, one thing that they're tasked with doing is sort of managing and becoming the stewards of the Mitre attack framework. So Mitre attack, ATT&CK, it's a bit of an acronym. It stands for Attacker Tactics and Techniques and Common Knowledge. So one way to think about a Mitre attack, especially the Mitre attack framework, is you can think of it as a knowledge base of all the different methods and ways that attackers are using to try to get access into enterprise environments. So I'll show you an example of that later on when we cut to my browser. I'll actually get on and show you the Mitre attack matrix for enterprise, but it's valuable because they enumerate all the different ways that attackers, all the techniques and tactics that they're using to try to hack and obtain data within the enterprise. So it's also useful because it gives us a common set of vocabulary. So as cybersecurity people in cybersecurity, we can talk to each other with a common set of explanations on tactics and techniques. It also describes various adversaries, and because when you see threat actors using consistent sets of tactics and techniques, you can begin to identify them a little bit more easily. So one thing in terms of limitations around Mitre attack, especially the Mitre attack evaluations, is this is not a perfect test. So I would say that one of the limitations around the attack evaluations is they don't test everything, because there's lots of different tactics and techniques available in the matrix. And typically what they do each year for the test is they pick one particular threat actor, and they perform the tactics and techniques that threat actor is known to do. Actually, this year you get a bit of a 2-for-1 because they picked two threat actors that we'll talk about in a bit. So here's another way to look at why this matters. And credit where credit is due. I did not invent this. SentinelOne certainly did not invent this, but David Bianco, who's a SANS instructor, and he actually works in cybersecurity at a major retailer, coined this way back in 2013. So this isn't anything particularly new, especially if you've attended any of his courses. But he talks about this pyramid of pain. And the idea is you want to inflict as much pain as you can on your adversary as possible. So depending on the methods and the protective measures that you have, that you're using today in the enterprise, a lot of that's going to govern how difficult, how much pain that you're going to inflict upon our cyber adversaries. So if the technology that you're using relies on hash values or IP addresses to identify an attacker, this would be things like antivirus technology, or just basic firewalling technology, for example. Those things are pretty easy for an attacker to circumvent, right? It's trivial to change the hash on a file or come at you from a different IP range. So tools that are operating at the lower part of the pyramid of pain, they don't inflict a lot of pain onto our adversaries. As the higher up that you go in this pyramid is where you get more pain, okay? Where they go from annoying to downright tough. So at the very tip of the pyramid, right, tactics, techniques, and procedures, it's really darn difficult for an attacker to change their tactics, techniques, and procedures, because they're used to doing things in certain ways. And as you may already know, the numbers of the TTPs, they're relatively finite. So if you can home in on and identify their specific TTPs, this is where you want to be. And this is where Mitre Att&Ck lives. So let's talk about the testing flow that the attack evaluations do in the fall. So in the fall of 2020, the fall of each year, they conduct a series of tests. In this case, it was over 3 days. They set up a number of systems in their test range. And what they've done, as I've said earlier, is they've picked out 2 threat actors, the Att&Ck threat actor and the Fin7 threat actor. And what they do is they conduct this series of steps or stages, 20 major stages, all right, composed of 174 sub-steps. So they run these steps against the systems, and then they bring in various vendors, 30 vendors this year. And the hope is that the EDR technologies will be able to detect or protect against the various steps and attacks. 2 new things they did this year is they did a first time ever a multi-platform test. So both Windows and Linux were in scope. There's about 12 sub-steps that involved a Linux host, and they also did a prevention or protection test as well. So as they are executing these steps, they picked out the Att&Ck threat actor and the Fin7 threat actor. And if you have really, really good eyesight, you can see that Fin7, they're financially motivated. They go after US retail, restaurants, and hospitality. Att&Ck, this threat actor mostly goes after and targets, is known to target banks, right? So they're gonna, Mitre is using the known tactics, techniques, and procedures that these 2 threat actors are known to do. So how is this scored? How is the data scored? So it looks like this. When they run a step, then you would hope that the product is going to detect it, okay? If it doesn't, it's considered a miss, right? So the very first step you will see, I'll show you, is the opening of a rich text format document with Word. So the hope is that whatever protective product, detective product that you're using is going to be able to record that. If it records it, at the very least, that is scored as telemetry. Now, if the product under test is able to perform additional context and additional analytics on that step, then ideally you'd be able to determine that this is potentially looks like a Mitre tactic, Perhaps someone is trying to achieve initial access, or perhaps this looks like phishing. And even better, if the product can determine that this is a Mitre technique, then that's even richer. So you have sort of data over here on the left, and then you begin to have enrichment or analytic detections is what Mitre calls the latter three. So minimally processed data over to enriched data. What else before I get to the actual data? There's also two additional qualifiers or modifiers that you will see in the data. Number one is Mitre allows for a configuration change. So imagine your product is being tested, and let's pretend that it missed, right? It didn't register telemetry, or perhaps it didn't register a tactic or technique. Mitre allows you to go back, you as the vendor, to go back and then change the product. Sometimes the changes are minimal. Maybe it's an expansion of a field in the user interface. Sometimes the changes are a little more serious. You have to make actual changes to the detection logic of the product. So whenever that occurs, they note that as a config change. If there's been a significant delay in the time that the detection comes back into the console, sometimes some vendors, they're still using technology such as sandboxing, which can inherently have some delays. That's one example where there's a delayed response, and then that's also noted in the console. So let's do this. Let's, with the time remaining, let's go over to Mitre's actual website, and let's take a look at some of the data. So this, again, this is the enterprise matrix, the enterprise attack matrix. We have the tactics across the top, and we have techniques under each of the columns. And here on this tab, on this URL, this is the results for the Carbonac and Fin7 testing. Normally, if we were doing this live, I would invite audience participation, and I would ask individuals in the audience, which of the vendors we want to see the results for. So because we're not doing this live, I'm pre-recording this, then I get to pick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my results. So here are the results for Sentinel-1, and then I'm going to pick two more. I'm going to pick Microsoft, because everybody knows about Microsoft. I get asked about that one quite often. And I'm also going to pick on, or rather, I'm just going to choose Checkpoint. And I'm choosing Checkpoint because there's been a lot of talk in social media. Checkpoint was pointing out that we did not include them in some of our marketing slides. So I will definitely include them for this comparison. So you can see over here, I have my tabs opened up. I have the data for Sentinel-1 on the first tab. I'm going to scroll down, look at some graphs and charts. And on the second tab, I have the data for Microsoft. I'm going to scroll down to the same chart. I'm going to do the same thing for Checkpoint. I also have two additional tabs that I want to point out that I've pre-opened. This one here, this is their technique comparison tool. So it's super handy when you want to compare techniques between multiple vendors. You know how I talked about there was 174 steps that were conducted in this test? You can see all 174 steps here on the left-hand side. Scroll, 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 174 steps. I find this interesting because sometimes I've seen some vendors, marketing departments, they've said that they scored 100% detection and over 20 major steps, right? Well, I said, well, there's not 20 steps, there's actually 174. There's sort of like 20 major, but there's a total of 174. So you can actually come in here and take a look at all 174 steps, and you can see whether or not someone has detected or if they missed. And then over here, there's another great tool. This is the participant comparison tool. So here you can pick out two different vendors that you want to compare. So, Sentinel-1 to anybody else, to the Microsoft or Checkpoint. And then you can very quickly say, show me everywhere the two products were similar, where they had matched steps, and then show me where they were different, right? So it's a super handy way if you're doing some kind of EDR comparison or a bake-off right now, and you want to know how your final two stack rank on this particular test. It's a great, simple way to do that. So let's take a look at some of the data. So let's take a look at first. Let's look at checkpoint. So when I look at the data here, and you can see here's all the scoring on the bottom. So again, if there was a miss, or if there was no detection, that comes up as none. And what you can do with these charts is you can dynamically filter out the telemetry, the tactics, techniques, and the general detections that the product has actually made. So very quickly, you can see these are the areas that the checkpoint product has failed to detect. And then you can do the same thing over with anybody else that you wish to compare. So then on the Microsoft side, start filtering out all of their detections, and you're left with all of the misses, the areas that that the products did not detect. And then of course you can do, and if you sort of eyeball between checkpoint and Microsoft, I don't know, I would hazard to say that probably it looks like Microsoft missed a little bit more than checkpoint. And then you can do the same thing for anybody else. In this case, I've got Sentinel-1 up. So I'm going to filter out all of my telemetry, my general, my tactics, and technique detections. And you can see that Sentinel-1, we didn't miss. So another way that you can sort of see the totality of the data is you scroll back up, and you can see over here on the right. So this is the row for the Carbonac and Fin7 testing for this year, and we detected in 174 of 174 steps. And then you can go back and up and take a look at the specifics for Microsoft. So they're 151 out of 174, and you can do the same thing for Checkpoint. So 162 out of 174. So they did better than Microsoft. Something else, you know, how I mentioned the configuration changes that vendors were allowed to make. So what you can do to sort of figure that out really quick is you can click on the actual testing round, right? So clicked on the Carbonac and Fin7 round, and all the techniques and all the steps are shown here. Okay, so step 1A, 1A1, you know, they scored telemetry and a technique. Okay, but it also points out when a configuration change was made. So you could just really quickly just do a search for configuration change. So that comes up 32 times on the first round of testing, and you can really quickly go through and find, you know, where is it that, say, for Checkpoint, that they had to make a configuration change in order to, in this case, score a technique, here to score a technique. And you can see that it was a logic change each time for each of these. So there's about 32 of them on here. And then again, you can do the same thing for Microsoft, or drill in there, and let's just do a find, and we've got about 22 times that shows up on this page. And then we can do the same thing for Sentinel-1, do a quick find, and again, it's 0, right? So in other words, we didn't have to make any configuration changes to the product to get the results that we got. Last thing I'm going to do, sort of keeping my eye on the clock here, is what you can also do is sort of take a look at the configuration that had to be brought to what products the vendor have to bring. So when you take a look at let's take a look at Microsoft. The Microsoft configuration looks like this. They had to bring Defender 365 Defender that was enabled. They brought Defender for endpoint. Of course, they brought Defender for server. They brought their Linux agent for CentOS. They brought something called the Microsoft Defender for Identity, and they brought MCAS Cloud App Security. And when you compare that to, say, for example, what we had to bring, we brought our Windows agent and our Linux agent, and then of course our management platform. So there are, like I mentioned before, 30 vendors that were tested this year. So I always encourage customers to kind of ignore the marketing hype that any vendor publishes. I don't even bring up my own marketing data, but you just come straight to the Mitre site. It's free, and you can begin to just look at and compare all of the data on your own to determine what's going to be the best fit for you and your organization. I am going to pause this now, and I think we're going to move into some live Q&A. So thank you very much for tuning into my session today, and have a great day for the rest of Vancouver B-Sides.